Every interaction, you need to create value both ways. The finish line was just here. I fell towards it and my nose was a fraction over it. 3 months after I started, the gold price fell by 25% and the whole business was cash flow negative in a significant way. Just because you're the strongest, it doesn't mean you have to win all the time. I often believe that if you get the how right, the what will look after itself. You can either work within the boundaries that are set for you, or you can think outside of them. To be happy in your job, you need to...
Gavin Wood, a highly accountable and commercial tech leader, a true trailblazer in the Australian tech industry, and our very first tech titan. With over 20 years of experience in technology across different industries, including organisations such as Oracle, BBC, Reuters, Kmart and Coles Myer, with over 10 years as CIO, Gavin has a strong track record of leading high-performing technology teams to deliver real transformational change. His ascent to CIO has been an incredible journey, with lots of learnings and lessons along the way. Gavin, thank you for joining me today. I was doing a bit of research about you, and one of the things that really stood out for me was back where it all began for you. And I saw that you actually did a degree in computer science in South Australia University,
Yes.
Back in the late 80s. And I was quite intrigued. I did some further research, and what I discovered there's I couldn't get the actual time frame, but in 1990, only 1,000 people in Australia graduated with computer science. So it's still a relatively uncommon degree at that point. So I'm interested, what or who inspired you to follow that path?
I went to a school in Australia, South Australia, called St Ignatius, and there was a priest there was one of my teachers, Father Lane, who taught me how to use a computer and start doing programming.
Yeah, right.
Admittedly, I wasn't a well-applied student, and I did want to do law, but I didn't get the marks to get in there, but I did get the marks to get into computer studies, so that's what I did.
Yeah, right, okay. And then once you finished your degree and you stepped into the workplace, how did you find what you'd learned at university? How did that translate into the workplace?
Well, I have to say I brought that same level of application to my university studies as well. I wasn't a great student at all. And it took me a few years in the workplace to understand that I need to bring my best effort every day to be successful. And just cruising through was not going to be, was not the route for me. And at times it was a hard lesson to learn, but having realised that, it's opened a lot of doors for me when I actually apply myself with 100% of my abilities.
Yeah, right. So when did you learn that lesson? Was that whilst you were at university, or was that once you stepped
after
into
university?
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I passed university. If the finish line was just here, I fell towards it and my nose was a fraction over it, would be the best way to put it. I did learn a fair bit from university, but I have to say that I probably could have worked a lot harder to actually be a lot better. And but it did give me a good skill in being able to teach myself things, because I had to teach myself things that I wasn't present for because I didn't make the lecture or something like that. And I was able to apply that in the workplace. There you
go. So without even knowing it, you kind of learned how to innovate, be creative, and adaptive from the offset. The first 15 years of your career, you worked for some absolutely incredible businesses and organisations, BBC, Reuters, David Jones, Coles Myer. You spent some time in the UK, obviously spent some time here in Australia. It's a big period, but if you were to look at that kind of time frame, what were the key lessons that you learned in that time?
The first decade of my career was very technical. In the 90s, Oracle was the go-to technology, and I was very fortunate to live in the UK for a number of years, and I was very well paid for it, probably far too well paid for it for someone my age. But what I learned was how the technology stack works end to end. I worked as a programmer, as a systems administrator, as a DBA. So actually understanding how a program interacts with storage, how it interacts with the compute power, how it works over a network, and those sorts of things has actually put me in good stead for the rest of my career. That really strong technical foundation means, although I probably couldn't work on the tools again in today's times, I bring a really thorough understanding of how the end-to-end works, which I find in today's times of specialisation, many people in the profession don't fully appreciate. When I am troubleshooting something or helping someone to troubleshoot something and asking, so what happens from the pane of the glass when you press that? Where does it go for authentication? Where does it go to go and get the data? Where's the logic sit? I often get blank looks back from people because you do need to think about how that works. And in my most recent role at Newcrest, some of the mine sites are very remote, and having an application that has to run over a satellite link and then work back to a data center somewhere in a hyperscaler through multiple tenancies is complex.
Yeah, and pretty abstract.
Yeah,
as well. It's interesting because what you described there was almost an apprenticeship.
Indeed.
Albeit indirectly, but in technology. And I think about apprenticeships as really touching all the different facets of a profession, to really understand how the different bits kind of interact and work with each other. And I also noticed through that time frame that you had a number of I'm going to call them short, sharp stints at places. You were kind of in and out in 2 or 3 years. How mindful at that point, I guess, were you in your career about what you were looking to achieve with those roles?
To be frank, in the 90s, often I'd get rung up and offered a lot more money to go somewhere else, and that was very tempting. I did have 2 stints at Reuters where I worked in a small team of really gun Oracle people, and I left and then came back. They paid me the money that I got paid in the other place, and I really enjoyed working there, but many of the other places I went were more circumstantial. So I went to, for example, I ended up working at the BBC because I went to a party and I met the director of television of the BBC who was looking for people to help him with the IT department there because he wasn't happy with the way it was performing for his part of their business. And I ended up working at the program acquisition department for the BBC through that. And it was a great opportunity to work in what was a very fun place. And it was the first opportunity I had to actually bring a commercial lens to what I was doing with technology. I actually worked on commercialising the back catalogue of BBC, the BBC's collection of film and TV. Yep. So they were able to resell it unused rights onto satellite channels and things like that created several $1 million of additional value each year, or several £1 million of additional value each year for that business. And that experience is something that's sort of like I've very much applied to the rest of my career since then. And
so that's, as I said, that's interesting. So because take the BBC as an example, it's they've got no advertising income, so the ability to generate revenue. It's interesting there, the connection between technology and the commercial outcome of what an organisation is looking to achieve, and you it's quite apparent there that there was a connection there for you between those two things.
Very much so, and the same in terms of that serendipity. I came back to Australia for a holiday. A number of people I worked with at Oracle were actually working for Aussie Mail. I was actually sleeping on a friend's couch and got talked into coming and doing some work there for a while. And found that I wasn't living in the UK anymore after a couple of years. I was living back in Sydney in Australia. But again, I learned a lot there. That business, they were so focused on creating value so they could exit. And there's a lot of things that they did at the time where I scratched my head and going, why are we creating an internet phone service? Why are we doing this? But they're all things that they could speak to the investors about and in turn drive up the share price. And it was it was very similar to that experience I had at Reuters. Lots of really smart people. It was a real competition for getting funding for whatever technical idea you wanted to do. And you had to be a little bit, how can I put it, entrepreneurial in how to make things happen.
Do you think that's an important trait for someone working in tech?
I do think it is. I mean, I think you've got to view, you can either work within the boundaries that are set for you or you can think outside of them. The example I was thinking of in Aussie Mail, I felt that we needed to do a better job on reporting and I wanted to build a data warehouse. But I lost in the contest of ideas versus a new billing system. And but I'd been eyeing a Sun Spark box on someone's desk that no one was using. So I gave a system administrator a case of beer in order to rack it and reformat it and use it as the data warehouse. And it actually, that move led to us identifying an issue with our accounts receivable for the business customers we had, a significant one. And we in turn implemented Oracle Financials in a rapid implementation of 3 months, which is, even in today's times, is pretty fast. And we're able to recover the cash from those parties, which in turn meant that we had the cash flow to continue trading until we were able to sell the business. So, that entrepreneurial, maybe questionable approach led to something that was really valuable for the company.
Oh, who doesn't like a case of beer as a bribe, right?
Indeed.
So, it's interesting, a couple of times there through describing that phase of your career, you talked about the connections that you made, the network. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's not, not what you know or who you know, it's who knows you.
Yes.
How did you sort of develop that side of your career, and how much time did you invest in building a network?
I've been really fortunate in, ending up in places where I've been able to work for some wonderful people.
Yep.
There's 2 particular mentors who I still have now, and I actually spoke to one of them on Sunday this week.
Yeah.
So after Aussie Mail, I went to work at David Jones.
Yep.
And at David Jones, a gentleman called Laurie Turner became the CIO there, and I worked for him. And I ended up working for him for the next 13 years. I followed him to Coles Myer down in Melbourne. I worked for him at Optus back in Sydney. I commuted from Sydney to Brisbane to work for him at Horizon. The thing about Laurie is he was a values-based leader before anyone was even talking about that.
Yep.
He is someone who was successful not by climbing over the back of other people, but by treating people with respect. He's a really well-loved executive. He knew everyone's name. He took the time to ask them how they were going. And I learned so much from him in how to form cultures, how to treat people. And you can probably imagine, that earlier part of my career, I had an element of misplaced technical arrogance, and bringing everyone along, letting them be the best person they can and make the contribution they can because you created the space for them to do that. I very much learned that from Laurie. And to your point, that there seems to be a large number of companies on my CV. There's only one person for 13 years of that. And he's been a wonderful source of advice for me since then as well. And I very much channeled much of what I learned from Laurie, and also from another gentleman, Peter Marler, who was the group CIO at Coles Myer.
Yep.
Peter was a really brave CIO. He put his chest out and went into any fight. He was great at marketing. He was really focused on that. And he had a phrase that I loved. It was, when you're successful, no one will remember how much it cost. And both he and Laurie, I've very much channeled the lessons I've learned from them into my role at Newcrest as the CIO. And on day one at Newcrest in the CIO role, which happened about a year after I started, I talked about working for them. I said, these are some great teams I've been a part of, and I want to create a team here like that. Let's talk about what kind of team we want to be, what kind of leaders we want to be. And, I very much, it's a cornerstone of what I've brought forward in my career.
Yeah, fantastic. So if someone is sort of listening to this and looking for some advice around how to find a mentor, or what attributes makes a good mentor in your opinion?
I think someone who, first off, I'm conscious as well that every interaction you need to create value both ways.
Yep.
So it's not just, I think there's the flattering moment of someone actually wanting your advice, which is great, but also being conscious about how you can contribute to them.
Yep.
And seek out people who maybe aren't like you. You don't, we tend to attract people that are similar to us sometimes.
Yeah.
And finding someone who's going to challenge you, or maybe tell you that you're wrong, or that you're not seeing it right, or that you maybe need to see it another way, I think is really important.
Yeah, great. Okay. And I think I'm a big believer that we're shaped by the feedback that we receive. And often that comes from our mentors through that journey. What would you say has been the most significant feedback that you've received in your career?
Actually, it's from Laurie. He actually said to me once, this is very early when I was speaking with him, just because you're the strongest, it doesn't mean you have to win all the time. And he then went on to explain that what he meant by that was that I need to create the space for other people to succeed.
Yeah.
And you can't, you succeed as a team and you fail as an individual. So, which I think was really good advice.
Yeah, that's great advice. So you mentioned Newcrest there.
Yes.
And obviously that's been your most recent role. You've been with them for the last 11 years.
Yes.
9 as CIO. And I read somewhere that you joined as 2IC to, is it Carl Duckinson?
Correct.
Is that right? Yeah. Were you actually hired specifically as his successor? Was that the plan?
Yeah, that's correct, actually. I was still working for Laurie in Brisbane at Horizon, and Peter Marlow actually was in town and took me out to lunch. He was coaching Carl Duckinson and some of Carl's team and said, you should come and join Newcrest. You'll be CIO within a year or so. So I took the plunge and moved to Melbourne to take up the role. Although it didn't pan out the way that I expected. About two or 3 months after I started, the gold price fell by 25%, and the whole business was cash flow negative in a significant way. And the IT function went through a very painful restructuring, which saw at site and at group it went from about 360 people to 120 people. And all of my former peers as direct reports to Carl Duckinson, and Carl left the business, and I became CIO with a new team of people who'd never really worked at that level before, but had the wonderful opportunity to apply all the lessons that I'd learned from great people in the past.
Yes, I read about that. I read that when you took over as CIO, you were tasked with building a streamlined function. I think was the phrase that was used. How did you navigate that?
I was conscious that you need to present what you need to the outside world and meet their needs, but I didn't want us to just crawl into the cave and wait out the bad times the company was experiencing. So although we were very cost conscious, and I wanted to flip that around to being value conscious as well. And part of that focus was having a really big focus on metrics. So measuring things, having all of those things to hand, using that to drive the actions. We created a thing that we called the fact base in Newcrest. And that was was a spreadsheet, but now a very long, big digital platform that contains licenses, calls, incidents, SLAs, etc. And I remember after being there a year and doing this, overhearing one of the people who work in the teams explaining to a new person it started that before we put the fact base in place, we didn't know we were successful because we didn't measure it, and now we do.
You're right.
And we know we're successful. So that has enabled me to then make the case for value and articulate the value that we're creating. And if you look back through those measurements, we can demonstrate through benchmarking year on year that we are the best in class when it comes to cost. And it doesn't mean that I'm looking for the lowest cost, it's the overall rather than the individual pieces. We can demonstrate that we're aligned with our customers. For the last 7 years, we've been at or above 8 out of 10 for a net promoter score from site general managers. And in mining, site general managers are kings of their kingdom. Sadly, all kings and no queens. But to have that alignment with that cohort and be able to demonstrate that is really important. And finally, we had a business improvement system using the McKinsey Wave tool. Much of what we delivered, largely through our digital investments, were measured in terms of returns, whether that's additional free cash flow or cost avoidance. And over 7 years, we've delivered hundreds of millions of dollars of value to our business. And let me assure you, our CapEx budget was a fraction of that each year.
Yep.
So I think that culture of measurement has enabled us to be able to turn it into a discussion about value, and also meant we've had a track record of delivery that we can point back to, which in turn makes that conversation of why I want to make this investment a lot easier the next time round. And I should add, to the credit of the team that I've had the privilege of working with, their on time, on budget delivery of projects for years now has been at around about 97%. The worst year we had was 91%, which I'm not aware of anyone in the Australian market who's anywhere near that kind of level of delivery.
I'm not aware of anyone on the planet with that kind of delivery. I think I also read in 1 year you delivered 400 projects.
Yes,
97%, which is an incredible achievement. And you've outlined there some the business tools and the way you've delivered those things. But I also read that your strong focus was on, I think the quote was that the type of team you wanted to be.
Yes.
I just wonder if you could elaborate. What does that mean?
It's very much a values-based team. I think, I'd articulate it as a team that has a strong desire to be successful, while getting the care and trust and respect right as well. And I think those behaviours around, wanting to use metrics to define things, trying to be comfortable with uncertainty, which we have to experience all the time, but getting the respect right for the people that we work with has really been the cornerstone of what's made us successful. I often believe that if you get the how right, the what will look after itself. And those values and behaviours that we have very much have been the case. The other thing I also believe is when you're in a senior role, you set the tone, but you don't really own the culture of your team. The people throughout the team own that culture. And although, I mentioned on the first day as CIO, I talked about what kind of team we wanted to be, and I listened to and we captured a lot of that. We actually gave that to a group of people who are on the ground, level 1 employees and contractors who came to be known as our cultural ambassadors. They took some of those thoughts and behaviours that we talked about on that first day, linked them back to Newcrest's 5 values, and those behaviours and values have very much become the thing that drives the how for us. And we actually recognise that through what we call the I Love It Awards. It's living our values in IT. Every quarter, recognising the behaviours that people have displayed. And it's great reading through the nominations that we get from across the whole team, both out at our sites and also at the group level as well. So the Peter Drucker quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think that's what's kind of going around my head as I'm listening to you kind of describe there the way that you very mindfully, not in a way of what you wanted, but you were very, what's the right word? You watered it, you nourished it, you actually encouraged it to flourish. I guess with that in mind as well, as you stepped into that role as CIO, you've got some fantastic role models around you through your career. I've no doubt worked with other great people as well in your time. What traits did you look to adopt from those people in your own kind of version of being a CIO? Given the burning platform that the Newcrest business was facing at that point in time, I really wanted to channel the calmness of Laurie. I think, when something goes wrong or, a backup had failed and a system had failed, advising people, take your time, make sure you get it right, don't jump to fixing it straight away, spend a bit of time to make sure that you understand the underlying cause. I know that the goal of incident management is to restore service straight away, but I'd like it to stay restored. So I think creating that kind of calmness was important in the early days. And also articulating, I think when you're facing difficult times, that having that cultural compass to point to and reinforcing that was very important.
Yeah, great. Often people see someone in a role as a CIO, but they don't necessarily, I guess, understand exactly what does that mean. What does a typical day in the life of Gavin Wood look like?
Well, right now, because I finished up at Newcrest, it's much quieter. But prior to that, a typical day would I'd probably be up before 6, maybe checking emails, maybe a call to Canada. Then I'd get my son up, I'd make him breakfast, get him ready for school. And if it was a Monday or Friday, I would take him to school. Otherwise, my wife would. Then, and again, another thing I learned from one of my mentors, Laurie went running every day. It didn't matter how hot it was or how hard it was raining. My version of that was I got on my bike and rode to work every day. Yeah. Again, if it was pouring with rain and I had to squeeze my socks out of the water when I arrived, it didn't matter. But I think that sent a message of consistency, purpose to people. And then it's largely meetings, but many of those meetings will be one-on-ones. I think the value in spending time with people, listening to them, giving them a bit of context that they may not be aware of that could help them find value or meaning or the right course, I think is really important. I think, at least a day to 2 days of my week will be spent on that. And in spite of culture eating strategy for breakfast, I do believe in a lot of structure. So we had a very structured set of leadership team meetings, which would cover different topics each week of the month. And if you attended all of those meetings, you could pretty much be across every part of what was going on in the IT function at all the sites, whether that was service delivery, projects, financials, risk, cyber, people, etc. So much of my week would be in meetings which were structured and in turn, would enable me to make any course corrections that I think needed to happen, me to have a view on the kind of development needs that the team needed and for us to be able to invest back in that, and also to spend time with our stakeholders. So I have, sadly, for my family, spent a lot of months away, out at mine sites and different places as part of Newcrest. But spending time at where people go to work, understanding things from their perspective, their context, and be able to bring that back and provide that to my team to help them be successful has been really helpful too. So that's been my typical week. And if I look at this year, I've probably been away from home about 3 months in total already.
You're not going to miss that?
No. Well, my son won't miss it, actually. He's made that very clear.
Yeah, I'm sure he won't. You've been CIO, or had been up until last week, for 9 years with Newcrest, which is about 2.5 times the average tenure. I'm just interested in how you stayed fresh in the role with what you were looking to achieve.
I think that strong desire to be successful translated into the team actually looking for new things. So, we started off very much in the traditional IT space of networks, infrastructure, enterprise systems. We gradually took on all of the OT apps, and that then created a platform for us to move into the digital space. So there's a lot of work that we did in AI, data, etc., that created a lot of interest in the role. And also in the transition towards that, we tried to be fairly entrepreneurial. We did a lot in crowdsourcing with an organisation called Unearthed. We actually co-developed a online crowdsourcing platform with them, which was quite successful at the time. So I think finding those projects were helpful. And also I think we were consciously using what we were doing in the external world to build our internal brand. So if a mining engineer from outside spoke to their mate inside Newcrest and said, I see you're doing really cool things with crowdsourcing or with artificial intelligence, it seemed to be more valuable than me actually saying that to them. So it seemed to be time well spent. And I think as in recent years, I've been very fortunate to work for Suresh Vadanagra, who's our Chief Technical and Projects Officer, or was our Chief Technical and Projects Officer at Newcrest. And he afforded me the chance to work on a lot of other different things, whether that was in technical strategy for the company, culture in his team, and others that have been nice side gigs to have, or side hustles, as I used to like to call them, that kept things interesting for me.
Yeah, great. That you've had an incredible career, and you've acknowledged, I guess, some of the real positive aspects of what you've achieved and opportunities that have presented. Are there any regrets?
Yeah, actually, there's one person I haven't mentioned that I do want to mention actually before we get on to regrets. Yeah, and that's also Jared Bond, who I worked for a long time at Newcrest, and Jared has a wonderful sense of humour and lots and lots of wonderful phrases as well that I've learnt a lot from. That my team sadly have had to learn too. Hopefully they found them to be quite useful. But his support, as well as Suresh's through my time, has been particularly important to me. Newcrest at times has been a hard place to work, and having that support of the person you work for, I think, is really important.
Yep.
I have a little formula. That to be happy in your job, you need to, 50% of it is liking and respecting the person you work for, 25% is liking and respecting the people you work with, and 25% is liking what you do. And if you don't get that first one right, you're never going to be happy. So I've been very fortunate. So I just wanted to share that too.
Yeah, thank you.
But on regrets, I think many of my regrets tend to be actually maybe I think I could have behaved better at different points in time. I like to think when I'm at my best, I think about what's going to happen next from the action I'm taking and start thinking over the horizon. And there are on some occasions that I think that I maybe should have thought that through a bit more, because the impact I want to have on people is a positive one. And I'd like to say that I'm at my best every day, but I'm not. And it's those things where, if I'm fortunate, I get the chance to apologise. Sometimes you don't get to have that moment back again. So I think that it's people stuff that I think I regret the most, where I wish I'd given people more time. I hadn't been so quick to get to the course of action that was required. I like my respect is important to me. That I feel respected, and I like to give respect. And when I feel that I haven't fully respected someone else, that's when I've disappointed myself. So that's probably my main regret.
Yeah, okay. And I guess that resonates with your sense of leading through values. Your kind of personal sense of that's very important to you in terms of getting the outcome, the interaction you've had with that person, the way you've understood them, as well, which I think has kind of come consistently throughout our conversation as well. If you were to give some advice to your younger self, or or maybe to someone that's stepping into the world of technology as a career, what would be your kind of one or top piece of advice you would pass on?
Well, I think we've probably covered the one that that getting culture right and values right and treating people with respect. Every person that you interact with, it would be the first piece of advice. The next is sort of like staying curious and learning. And I know lots of people talk about that, but I think every day there's moments. You may be sitting in a meeting or attending a talk, and you might be bored. You've got to look for that 1% of value that's there. There's always something which makes you think, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, or maybe I need to change what I think about that approach, or I could use that and apply that elsewhere. And I think you can then apply that learning mindset to the businesses and organisations that you work in. I found it really fascinating learning about the businesses that I've been privileged to work with, and how they work, how the commercials work, and the context that's given me to understand how I can use technology to create value and work with people and stakeholders, because just because you want to do something doesn't mean that they want to do it with you. I think having that curiosity, and not just in the technical, but in the way the technology is applied.
Yeah, that's great. You've obviously just recently finished with Newcrest. I'm not going to ask you what's next, but we are here in the State Library.
Yes.
And we were talking earlier about books and a shared passion for books. And you mentioned that you've probably not had as much time to read as you would have liked. So I guess my final question is, what's top of the reading pile?
I've actually just started a thing by Rick Rubenstein. He's a producer from the Beastie Boys and other things.
Yes.
He's written a book called The Creative Act, and I've started reading that. A good friend of mine who I've known since the 90s in London, who lives here in Melbourne now, gave it to me as a gift a little while ago, and I haven't had a chance to start it. And another person who's actually had a big part in making us successful, a guy called Dougal McBurney, who had a business called Versa. I had dinner with him recently, and he'd been reading it and recommended it to me because he was using it to think of what his next business idea would be now that he's finished with the Versa idea. So I'm up to about page 30 of that.
There you go. Well, I'm going to hold you to account. I'm going to check in with you on that because it's on my reading list as well, actually. Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks, Anton.
Cheers. Thank you for listening to Tales from Tech Titans, and be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. If you'd like to get more insights about tech careers, then check out the Emmbr, that's EMMBR LinkedIn page for the latest updates, articles, and engaging discussions.